I'm John Flanders, sort of the organizer of the forum series, I guess you could say. I want to thank Linda O'Malley for all the work she's does here and getting this space for us for the Oakwood Community Center. I just want to say a word about the forum series. We named it after James Connolly, who lived in Troy for a couple of years, who was one of the great heroes of Irish history. He was a socialist labor leader and freedom fighter for Ireland who led the Easter Rebellion in 1916, was executed by the British as a result. And Austin Devine, who's sitting right there, lent us this beautiful plaque made by his brother while he was in detention by the British back when, in the 80s, Austin?
71, 40 years ago.
71.
He wasn't imprisoned, he was imprisoned without charge or trial. Interned.
Interned, right. Anyway, we're really pleased tonight to have Steve Early with us. Steve is, in my opinion, the foremost labor journalist in these United States. He's written for a number of publications, worked for many years as an organizer for the communication workers who represent the Verizon workers who were just on strike and still in a very contentious and difficult negotiation with a very powerful and greedy and repulsive company from a labor point of view.
Don't sugarcoat it, John.
And Steve has written in many venues, The Nation, for various newspapers, other periodicals of the left press. You'll find his stuff. And he's got 2 books out, which I recommend highly. The first one is Embedded with Organized Labor, a collection of his writings over the last 20 years or so, 30 years maybe. You'll learn a lot from this one, I tell you. And his latest book is The Civil Wars in U.S. Labor, which is about the issues involved in labor in the last several decades, questions of tactics and strategy, trying to deal with the question of why unions have not prospered and gained members in the last period. I won't go into more detail than that. He'll talk about it in his talk. But both these books are available in the back, and I really urge you to pick them up if you haven't already. So without further ado, Steve Early.
Thank you, John, and thank you everybody who's come out tonight in this wonderful new venue. I'm going to keep this very short so we can throw it open to what I know is going to be a lively and very well-informed discussion, because we've got a group of experienced activists here tonight, many of whom, or some of whom, I've had the privilege of working with, and I'd just like to recognize a few. Starting off with the name of the place, to commemorate Connolly in this fashion means a lot to me personally. One of my personal labor heroes, a great model of labor internationalism, and during my 27 years as a rep for CWA District 1 in New York and New England, I remember back in the late 80s working with Brother Jim Devine, then the president of the Troy Telephone Workers Local, and the original fundraising project to create the monument to Connolly here in Troy and get the Irish Transport and General Workers involved, and the Irish TUC, and the unions here in upstate New York and CWA District 1. And so now we've gone from that great commemorative effort to having a Connolly Forum. I shudder to think what you'll be doing here in Troy to commemorate Connolly's memory in 1916.
I mean in 2016.
What's that?
In 2016,
excuse me, right. The centennial of the Easter Rising, right. So let me just acknowledge again and thank Brother John for inviting me over to be part of the discussions here. When you switch from being a kind of labor organizer of long-standing to an itinerant labor book peddler, one of the things you kind of depend on is the kindness of friends, and friends who become book reviewers. And Brother John, who, as you know, is no slouch, as a labor journalist himself, wrote for a monthly review what I still consider to be the best review so far, and I'm sure the best review of all for this second book, Civil Wars in U.S. Labor. And I want to thank him for that, and thank Monthly Review for running it. I want to thank everybody connected with the Troy Labor Council. It's great to see an old friend from 1118 here tonight, Pat Kumo, who, along with other brothers and sisters who are veterans of the most recent phone company strike, the 2-week walkout in August at Verizon. Pat and I worked on a big organizing campaign over in New England in 1994 when we were able to bring 1,500 telephone company customer service reps into the union. The company at that time was NYNEX, and they went on to participate in very actively in every subsequent contract campaign and now strike at the company since then. And Pat, both for her own local to this very day and for CWA District 1, was one of the most effective member organizers that's ever been produced by the CWA member organizing program. Brother Gordon McClellan, who many of you know from his work for years with the Carpenters and the Cornell ILR Extension School, was a longtime co-worker in our week-long leadership school for CWA local officers and stewards from throughout District 1. Great to see Gordon here tonight. I want to recognize Brother Ed Block. Many of you have known him for a long, long time in this area. His union, the United Electrical Workers, was really the first union that I had contact with, where the contact was favorable. I went to college in the late 1960s across the state line here in Vermont, and at that time the United Electrical Workers was the biggest union in the state, a real industrial union powerhouse with hundreds if not thousands of members in the machine tool industry in Springfield and other shops in Bennington and Rutland and St. Johnsbury. I got to know a terrific leader of the union, Jimmy Kane, who went on to become the district president for the UE in the Northeast and then later the national president. And a union which has as its motto then and now, the members are the union, is destined to stand out in the parched landscape of American labor. To this day, though smaller, much smaller unfortunately than the UE was in its heyday, is still a shining example of democratic and militant and member-driven unionism, and provides a model that many other labor organizations would do well to emulate. Brother Andy Coates is here, as you know, been stirring up, along with his brothers and sisters in PEF, a little bit of trouble lately of the constructive sort. Also a longtime leader in the movement for single-payer health care as a doctor and as a member of the Physicians for a National Health Program. Some of you know we made quite a bit of progress in the first few months of this year, again across the state line in the great state of Vermont, with a very brave effort to move in the direction at the state level of the kind of single-payer health care program that we certainly didn't get out of the Obama administration in the form of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. I want to thank Regina for having me on her radio show when she still had a great labor radio show during my first book tour. And again, last but not least, recognized the delegation from Waterford, Brother Dom and his fellow IUE CWA 81359 fighter. Last time I was in the area was for a big contract campaign rally up there in February of 2010. And of course, this last winter, the same group, the Momentive workers, staged a very rare 3-day grievance strike almost unheard of in today's labor relations climate in the U.S., where it's become, unfortunately, increasingly rare even to have a strike at contract expiration, much less to utilize the very rare open-ended grievance procedure that Tom and his members still have, a legacy of their GE years, which enables them to walk out during the life of a contract over an unresolved contract grievance or safety problem or unfair dismissal or whatever. So why don't we start with just some of the recent signs of life in the labor movement, which have taken the form, not surprisingly, of major strikes. The Verizon strike, how many people here were out on the picket line as strikers? Well, I know everybody was out there in solidarity, but let's start with the strikers. How many veterans of the August strike? We have several right here. And then, all right, how many were out there with them? Okay. Befitting the tradition of solidarity in the Capital District. That strike was certainly not the first in the Northeast by the same or an overlapping group of telephone workers. There's probably no group of union members anywhere in the country, really, that have used the strike weapon as frequently over the last 30 years. When I first joined CWA in 1980, really the first strike that I was involved in was what was then a nationwide strike of workers at AT&T in 1983. This was before they broke up the phone company. And just to keep, the then and now contrast in mind, in 1983, the CWA, the Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and a then cluster of independent unions went out on a 3-day nationwide strike that involved 700,000 workers. Now think about that. That's 700,000, not 70,000, not 7,000, 700, not 70. To put things in perspective, today the largest single private sector bargaining unit with the capacity for a nationwide strike, I believe at this point, is the Teamsters at United Parcel Service. They've not had a nationwide shutdown since the 10-day strike in 1997, but that group, as big as it is by today's standards, is only about 200,000, 210,000. Only 3 decades ago, the bargaining environment, the kind of pattern bargaining we had back then, the big industry-wide contracts that still existed, covering over-the-road Teamster truck drivers and a much bigger workforce at the big three in the auto industry and a much bigger steelworker workforce. All of that's been whittled down and whittled away and undermined, much to our detriment. But to their credit, telephone workers in the Northeast continue to use the strike to make gains and, in more recent years, to fend off the kinds of concessions in the area of pensions and health care that, unfortunately, many other public and private sector workers have been forced to accept. We had in New York and New England, when the phone company was still NYNEX, a 10-day strike in 1996 that did not, unfortunately, have the benefit of IBW participation. We patched things up over the next 3 years. In 1989, we had a 4-month strike in New York and New England involving 60,000 members of IBW and CWA, one of the few successful anti-concession strikes of the 1980s. We had a brief period of labor peace at the phone company in the early 90s, but we're back out on strike in 1998. In 2000, by which point the NYNEX had merged with Bell Atlantic, and we had a 14 to 17-day strike in 2000. 2003, we had a protracted work without a contract campaign. Another big scuffle with the company in 2008, and an unfolding, perhaps intermittent strike saga this year. Quite a record of labor strife. Elsewhere in the region during the same time, Local 1298 another great addition to CWA since 1998, had a 1-month strike, Connecticut-wide, against SBC, now AT&T, and in 2004, Connecticut telephone workers went out again as part of the last nationwide strike that CWA had at AT&T, a 4-day strike in 2004 involving over 100,000 workers. So perhaps with the exception of the hotel workers groups at Yale, and maybe the machinists at Boeing, there have been very few groups anywhere else in the country that have been out on strike as much over the last 3 decades, either as part of national, regional, or statewide work stoppages as the members of IBEW and CWA in the Northeast. And that's why this Verizon struggle, as everyone here knows, is so important. I mean, because if you have a hugely profitable company, which we know Verizon is, able to shift healthcare costs to the degree that they're trying to among workers who are among the last workers in the country in the private sector who are not making premium contributions. The company obviously wants to get rid of retiree health insurance, wants to get rid of traditional group pension coverage, and wants to make other changes in the language of the contract that it took many years of struggle to win. And, you know, it was very interesting watching this struggle play out in August from a perch far away, which was a little bit frustrating. I was out in the Bay Area for the summer, but tried to write a lot about the strike. And, you know, it brought back memories of '89 and all of these other years where people really had to go on the defensive, reach out to the community, explain the issues to friends and neighbors and fellow union members, try to get the union's position communicated effectively in the press, in a climate in which it's become not only harder to strike, but in some ways more challenging to develop public sympathy and support for the defense of employment conditions and benefits and wages that unfortunately, the vast majority of workers in this country, both union and non-union, don't have. And I think what's so exciting about the emergence of the Occupy Wall Street movement is that now, a couple of months later, you know, we have a more favorable context for making our case. You know, people don't necessarily see the fight at Verizon quite the same way that they might have in August as you know, a battle between a relatively privileged union group taking on this exemplary example of corporate greed. You know, now we have a broader struggle against corporate greed and the abuses of economic and political power by the 1%. We have this terrific framing of the fight. You know, the us against them is now the 99% versus the 1%. I mean, I think that's a great addition to how we communicate our message and how we rally support from those who are not directly involved in these struggles and may otherwise, left in the grip of right-wing talk radio and a lot of other negative influences in our society, might be stirred up and resentment played upon and in various ways pitted against those folks, whether at Verizon or PEF or anywhere else, who are taking you know, a hard stand against concessions and fighting to hold on to things that unfortunately many other people never had in our country or lost long ago. And that's why it's so important, as we know, to continue to fight for more universal solutions to some of these problems. I mean, ultimately, as we've said for years at the phone company, you know, there is no solution to the problem of medical cost inflation at AT&T or Verizon or any of these other places where, relatively speaking, they haven't had much success because of union resistance getting people to pay more for their benefits. And our counter at those companies has always been, hey, you know, health care for all, not health cuts at NYNEX, not health cuts at Verizon, not health cuts at AT&T, because, you know, if big, rich, profitable companies like Verizon and AT&T want to do something about the cost of health care in this country, they can work with us for a Medicare for All system that would get this issue off the bargaining table once and for all. that would be a legislative and political solution that's been tested and found to be relatively effective and successful in Canada and other countries. And yet these concentrations of corporate power, these companies like Verizon and AT&T, they want to have their cake and eat it. They don't want to give up their grip on a complex package of job-based benefits, but they do want people to pay more for them. They sometimes don't want new hires to be eligible for them. They want to, control what medical services are going to be paid for and not paid for, but whether or not they can continue to provide the better than average coverage that their employees have enjoyed for years as a result of union bargaining. They don't want to join hands with the labor movement to seek a fundamental solution to the continuing crisis of healthcare. Out on the West Coast, just a month after the Verizon strike galvanized so much public sympathy and support because of the militance of the strikers, we had another very unusual strike at Kaiser Permanente, which is, with nearly 100,000 union members, the largest unionized hospital chain in the country, a health maintenance organization that's pretty prominent on the West Coast, but also operates in other parts of the country. And out there, surprisingly enough, a healthcare giant that's made billions in profits recently also rolled out for several of its unions in bargaining a very Verizon-like list of takeaways. Cost shifting, eliminating healthcare coverage for part-timers, ending the defined benefit pension plan and replacing it with individual retirement accounts, and other contract concessions. And just as on the East Coast with the RBW-CWA strike just a month ago, we had a several-day strike involving more than 20,000 caregivers at Kaiser, thousands of registered nurses and other hospital workers represented by two unions, the California Nurses Association and the National Union of Healthcare Workers, a new independent union. And they took, while other unions encouraged their members to cross their picket lines, unfortunately, a very strong stand, not only against these concessions, but also on issues related to the quality of patient care. Publicly blowing the whistle on cuts in staffing that have adversely affected the treatment that Kaiser patients and their families have been receiving, particularly in the area of mental health services. But that 1, 2, or 3 day strike, depending on who was involved and for how long, was a very important and powerful example of how unions, particularly in this environment, when they go out on strike, it has to be not just about the workers themselves and a necessary defense of their pay and their benefits and their contract conditions. There also have to be some issues, in this case the defense of quality patient care, that are going to resonate with the broader community. The two unions involved have been both now very critical of what's known as the Kaiser Labor Management Partnership, a previously touted by the AFL-CIO and many leading academics as a model of labor management cooperation. It's been rapidly unraveling out there at Kaiser in California. The company is becoming much more like a for-profit and more anti-union hospital chain. Unfortunately, some of the unions which continue to cling to the partnership relationship, including the Service Employees International Union, as I mentioned, a month ago, when there was an opportunity to create an even broader united front against Kaiser's concession demands, SEIU urged its 45,000 members at Kaiser to cross the picket lines of the CNA and the NUHW, which more than 1,000 brave workers refused to do. And they went out basically on individual sympathy strikes for 1 or 2, 3 days. Again, at a time when overall, the level of overall strike activity is at an historic low, to see the scale of the Verizon strike, to see the the Kaiser unions come together, not in open-ended contract strikes. I mean, this is not the 1980s. People are not signing up for siege warfare for 4 months worth of open-ended picketing and suffering and sacrifice on the scale of the NINEX strike in '89. But, more targeted, more strategic, 1, 2, 3 day, but intermittent protest strikes, again, framing the issues in a way designed to develop the broadest possible base of labor and community support. Being out on the West Coast, I just want to mention one other struggle that people probably heard about, but may not have followed that closely, which involved the West Coast Longshore Union, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. Very militant fight up in Longview, Washington. Again, here you have a traditional bastion of union strength, a union with a strong and proud tradition of internal democracy and militancy and progressive politics for a long time. In the 50s and 60s and 70s, a union like the United Electrical Workers that was left or was kicked out of the CIO and operated as an independent union, now back in the AFL. But the West Coast Longshore Union faced a major challenge this summer in a key port where its members had represented workers for 50 or 60 years. And a shipping company basically tried to come up with a subcontracting scheme, unfortunately aided and abetted by another AFL-CIO union, the operating engineers. And again, I don't want to go into all the gory details of this latest book. We can get into it in the discussion. But, in this period of crisis where we face a lot of external threats and enemies, one internal problem is this tendency on the part of some unions to undercut other unions. We just saw an example of that at Kaiser. We had to overcome an example of that many years ago in the telephone industry in the Northeast. In 1986, one of the strikes I mentioned, the 10-day anti-concession strike by 40,000 members of CWA at NINEX. During that strike, the 20,000 members of the IBW sat out the strike, and their leaders signed a Me Too agreement that basically said, we accept concessions, but if this other union wins their 10-day strike, we'll get the benefit of that settlement. Not exactly a formula for labor unity, solidarity, and successful anti-concession striking. Enough IBW rank and filers were disgusted by that and realized, what a breach of solidarity it was, and the fact that it needed to be remedied, that a number of them at the steward level ran against incumbent IBW telephone local presidents and business managers in 1987, 88, and 89. So by the time that 1989 rolled around, we had another confrontation with NINEX, now Verizon, over the same issue of healthcare cost shifting. We had a strong united front of 60,000 members who went out on strike, and it didn't really matter whether you were in IBW or CWA. Flash forward to this situation in Longview, the operating engineers got in there, agreed to a substandard contract. It's helpful to the employer in a dispute to say, oh, well, we're not doing non-union outsourcing. We have a union here. Well, unfortunately, it's not the union that has for years, since the great West Coast dock strike of 1934, raised the standards of workers doing longshore work and some warehouse work. For another union to come in and cut a substandard sweetheart deal is not helpful in the current environment, and it's kind of muddied the waters in a strike, or rather a struggle, where, as you may have seen, the national president of the union has been arrested. Scores of longshoremen and their family members have been arrested for their civil disobedience. And thanks to the NLRB running into federal court. The NLRB is always very fast to run into federal court when there's a union unfair labor practice to remedy. The ILW is now on the hook for about $500,000 worth of fines and damages as a result of their militant response. But having been up in Seattle and Portland recently, I can say that again, this is galvanizing the larger labor movement. The AFL-CIO bodies often as we know, timid about intervening in inter-union conflicts, have taken some pretty strong stands against the misbehavior, the unhelpful behavior of the operating engineers, and sided with the longshore workers in what is, like the Verizon struggle, an ongoing and open-ended conflict, but certainly representing, again, an intensification of struggle, and just as at Kaiser, just as at Verizon, just in West Coast Longshore, in traditional bastions of union strength. And if we can't hold the line in those places, it's sure going to become, as we've already seen, harder and harder for our brothers and sisters in the public sector, whether they're fighting back in New York or fighting back against Republican governors in Wisconsin or Ohio or Michigan, to beat back some of these attempts to impose concessions or strip people entirely of their ability to bargain about the pay and benefits and working conditions. Hopefully in the next week or so, the damage that was done by the Republican governor of Ohio will be overturned in the referendum vote that the labor movement got as a result of signing up more than 1 million Ohio citizens, and that counter-campaign against the elimination by the legislature of collective bargaining rights for public employees in Ohio is certainly a critical fight as well. But why don't I stop here? Much more for us to talk about, including about some of the struggles that people are involved in themselves here against our great governor in the state of New York. Clearly, one of the problems that we face is the bipartisan nature of the attack on workers' rights and on collective bargaining. I mean, people like Kasich in Ohio and Mitch Daniels in Indiana and Walker in Wisconsin and Snyder in Michigan are so bad that they make Andrew and DeVal Patrick over in Massachusetts and Malloy in Connecticut good by comparison, but only by comparison, because all three of them, or two of the three, have pushed their own schemes to curb the scope of public sector collective bargaining. Successfully in Massachusetts, where now for the first time, thanks to the actions of the Patrick administration and the legislature, unions at the municipal level are not going to be able to bargain about medical benefits in the way they have been in the past. The climate is not good when somebody who still purports to be labor-friendly, like another fellow Democratic governor, Jerry Brown, in California, and I was out for this display, just in the last 2 months, vetoed not one, but 2 card check bills. We all know that card check is the shorthand for a process of majority sign-up, workers in the private or public sector getting recognized, building a new union without having to go through the second and necessary step of a representation election. It was a core part of the Employee Free Choice Act that's now unfortunately dead on arrival in Washington, but out in the state of California with a Democratic governor, Democratic majorities in both houses of the state legislature, 2 key priorities in California this year were a card check provision amending the Agricultural Labor Relations Act in California that would benefit the United Farm Workers and its organizing efforts, and a card check provision that would enable probably the service employees, but maybe AFSCME as well, to organize tens of thousands of publicly funded home-based daycare providers. One of the biggest source of new members for CSEA, AFSCME, and the AFT in New York State in the last 10 years. Similar bargaining unit was going to be created in California, and the mechanism for the workers getting recognition was going to be a card check procedure. Brown, supposedly a great friend of Cesar Chavez, the Agricultural Labor Relations Act in California was first enacted when he was first governor, vetoed the card check amendment that would have enabled the Farm Workers Union, which is down to like 5,000 members. And there are 500,000 farm workers working non-union in California. So their organizing effort could have used a little boost. And given the nature of farm labor, the turnover of the workforce, the short growing seasons, the contractors and the agribusiness powerhouses they're dealing with, card check would really have made it easier for them to start to rebuild a union that has never been bigger than 100,000 members, but certainly needs to be bigger than 5,000 if the conditions in agricultural labor are ever going to be approved again in Canada. So Jerry Brown, great friend of labor, great friend of the farm workers, is apparently also a great friend of secret ballot elections. And we know how what sanctity they have. And he vetoed this bill that had been passed by the Democratic majority in the legislature. And then he moved on to veto the child care bill, the card check for child care workers, on the grounds that if the child care workers organized, they would be yet another budget buster in the public sector in California. And that itself, is a terrible sign of the times, because one of the few bright spots on the organizing horizon over the last 10 to 15 years, and I do have a chapter about it in this book, has been the very successful large-scale organizing by SEIU, by the AFT, by AFSCME in New Jersey, by CWA, and in Michigan by the UAW, of home-based workers, either child care providers or other direct care providers, taking care of the elderly, the chronically ill, the disabled, as home health care aides or personal care attendants. And there's 500,000 or 600,000 of these folks, mainly women, all still low wage. Many are people of color and foreign born. Biggest source of new union membership for those 5 unions and the labor movement. And much of that organization was kind of political, getting labor-friendly legislators or governors, when we had more of them, to, through executive order or legislation, create new bargaining units for these home-based workers, transforming them from independent contractors into kind of a bottom tier of the public sector. And, most of these groups, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, California, Ohio, Wisconsin, have only had a chance to bargain 1 or 2 contracts, and they are bare-bones agreements. The quid pro quo for these political organizing deals was they will not be covered by regular state worker health plans or pension plans. The group that I helped CWA organize jointly with AFSCME in New Jersey, most of the participants in the child care program there are mothers on workfare, taking care of their own kids or somebody else's in inner city neighborhoods in Camden or Trenton or Newark. And one of the little-noted tragedies of the rollback of collective bargaining, certainly in Michigan and in Wisconsin and Ohio for other public employees since January, has been the erosion of this bottom tier. 80 to 100,000 of these people who only recently got organized have lost their bargaining rights just since January in those states. Because the first thing the Republican governors did, if these bargaining units were not created by act of the legislation, was sign an executive order putting them out of existence. And the SEIU in Michigan is just about to lose a unit of close to 40,000 home health care aides, taking their Michigan healthcare affiliate from about 50,000 members to 10,000 members almost overnight as a result of the political organizing deal unraveling. So that's a very serious matter in the public sector, because we're not talking about policemen, firefighters, teachers, social workers, highway maintenance workers, doctors, all of whom are in very difficult fights to maintain and defend the gains of many decades of public sector bargaining where they've had it. These are new arrivals at the bargaining table, already pushed away, and once more in a desperate state of working poverty without the kinds of protections and the voice and the vehicle for lobbying, for the kind of funding that these programs need, that they were able to get briefly and hopefully will be able to regain, as a result of the continuing commitment, from 1 or more of those 5 unions that have helped organize this segment of the workforce. So let me stop there, throw it open, and sorry for rattling on so long. Would love to take questions, comments, suggestions, criticisms, fellow celebrations of the occupation movement. How about if we do it the labor notes method? We'll alternate between men and women. I'll keep a list if we get a lot of hands, and one question or statement or speech to a customer until everybody's had a chance to speak, and then we'll go around for second helpings. Sound like a fair way of doing it? Okay, it may involve some calling on women if I don't see female hands, so get ready.
Oh, not
Call
here.
them.
Not here.
Not here? Okay. All right. Yes, brother here.
I'd like to just mention 3 points. One, just a note in passing that this week, whoever is keeping track of this noted that the 7 billionth human being was born on the planet, which I think is pretty significant, seeing as how there were 2 billion when I was born. Could you speak to the issue? We heard about the Tinto Rio boron mine strike. In that matter, the company was rigidly intransigent. They weren't negotiating anything. It was essentially a lockout. And it wasn't really, the company wasn't swayed until the left coast longshoremen, Washington, Oregon, California, refused to handle Tinto Rio products. And that seems to have been the factor that swayed the company to move. And then the third thing, Rio Tinto, Tinto Rio, whichever they are, has just this week been in court finally answering charges of genocide in their mining, overseas mining against, I guess it was Indonesian civilians. Do you know anything much about that? That's not directly related.
Yeah, there's a wonderful labor documentary filmmaker and longtime union activist on the West Coast named Joan Seckler, who's made a terrific film of the struggle called Lockout. I don't know if maybe Joan, oh, you've seen it here?
Yes.
Did she show it here?
Yes.
Oh. And Joan was here?
Well, in Albany.
No.
Ah, oh, terrific. Okay. Well, then you know the story. Yeah, I mean,
Didn't
this.
say too much about the longshoremen, just mentioned it.
Well, most people think of the longshoremen as people working on the docks, but the union does have people working in some mines and warehouses and other kinds of jobs in other parts of California. This was kind of an interesting group out in the desert, as you saw in the film. If you saw it, a number of it was a lockout, not a strike, but a number of the people involved in this protracted struggle were Mormons. It was a kind of a politically conservative workforce in some ways. It was not a bunch of LA or Bay Area ILWU lefties, though that, was the culture of their national union. And to me, that's, one of the most interesting labor documentaries since, Barbara Koppel's American Dream or Harlan County. I mean, it really shows the interior workings of a contract campaign struggle where people who hadn't necessarily had that much experience with picketing, doing outreach, doing mass marches and rallies, learned how to do that with the help from other ILWU locals and their national officers and staff, and drew on the solidarity of people from other parts of California. And I think Joan tells the story very well of Rio Tinto's dreadful record of environmental devastation and depredation and labor violations anywhere that they've tried to open and operate mines. So part of the campaign, as the film depicted, was going global, having a group of road warriors who range not just throughout the rest of California to rally regional support, but went to London, I think, for a Rio Tinto shareholders meeting and built relationships with other unions around the globe that, dealt with this common employer. So highly recommend the film. It's a great case study in how people can come together and win a David and Goliath fight. I think there was some controversy within the longshore division of the union about why the pressure point of refusing to handle, Rio Tinto, product wasn't resorted to earlier. But the ILWU has a long history of politically related work stoppages for which it has risked, millions of dollars in damage suits. And I think there may have been some caution there, but certainly they upped the ante in time, combined with the rank and file organizing that the local itself did with its allies in the community and the rest of the labor movement to definitely fight them to a draw. But for labor education purposes, if you haven't seen it, there's great footage of the ratification meeting and the decision to take the company on, and good footage of people arguing it out among themselves, and how the bargaining committee worked. I mean, for people who don't have that insider view of how democratic a well-functioning union can be and how empowering it can be. And then there's lots of testimonials from people who had never really been that engaged in the union before. And as many strikes and lockouts are, this was like a transformative experience for them. So, great film. I'm looking for a female. Sister Pat.
Okay. Earlier, there was subject brought up of the single-payer healthcare, Medicare for all. And what I'm wondering is, how can we get labor on board? And we also have some groups that want to support, the Obamacare with the exchanges and try to, make them better. But I'm kind of wondering, do you have thoughts on how we can bring labor on board?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of folks in this room who've done more than probably anybody else in New York State to get more unions involved, and not just in a kind of an endorsement way. I mean, actual membership education and rank and file lobbying way. I felt that in my senior experience, the best teaching tool was these bitter strikes and contract campaign fights over healthcare cost shifting. It was a teachable moment in 1989, 2 months into the NINEX strike, when our dear friends in NINEX management cut off people's medical benefits, 60,000 people in their family. That got quite a few people who weren't great proponents prior to that of national health insurance, thinking about the drawbacks of a system that gives employers that much control, that ties health insurance to your job, and enables an employer to deprive people of access to affordable medical care when they go on strike, or when they retire early, or when they're laid off, or when they get out of school and can't find a job. So, we got more single-payer recruits, particularly out of the IBW side of that strike, than probably any series of educational conferences or meetings or other types of activities might have generated. I think there was a little bit of backsliding, quite frankly, in August. I think the unions were so quick to try to declare PPACA to be some sort of victory, that to go back and say, hey, we still got a problem here, which, look at Verizon's healthcare cost shifting demands. I'd say that's a problem. And it's a problem, as some of our policy wonks in this group know, in part because embedded in the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is this terrible excise tax provision, which is a mechanism for funding the extension of insurance to the uninsured through the costly and inefficient vehicle of private insurers, but subsidized not just by the U.S. taxpayers generally, but by those of us who, as we were told by Obama and Harry Reid and Max Baucus, have been driving healthcare Cadillacs around, right? And who have these luxury plans. Now, it was bad enough to hear that demonization of the product of years of union bargaining from these so-called Friends of Labor in 2009 and 2010 during the healthcare reform debate. And it was a bit of a stab in the back, since a lot of union members were mobilized to elect our friend in Obama in 2008 because John McCain wanted to do what? He wanted to tax our benefits. Right. So we defeat him, put the other guy in, and what do we find out less than a year later? That part of their plan to finance this discombobulated Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act scheme is to tax higher-end plans. Now, the labor movement did a lot of defensive scurrying around, as a report in the book in the fall of 2009, the winter of 2010, to stop this from happening in its worst form. In the original form of this proposal, certainly would have kicked in a lot earlier. than the final form of it. But the problem was that at a time when, CWA and every other union represented here should have been fighting not for single payer, for some kind of public option, what was our major focus of activity? Don't tax our benefits. Hands off our benefit plans. Kind of doesn't really resonate quite as well as healthcare for all, not health cuts at NYNEX or Verizon. And for those who said, well, we negotiated a deal with the White House, we postponed the impact of this excise tax. Yes, it was bad to have what we thought were Chevys described to the world at large as Cadillacs, but we won't have to worry about this for a few years. This was CWA's message. We'll have a couple of rounds of bargaining to solve this problem. Well, what was the first thing that Verizon did when it rolled out its healthcare cost-shifting proposals in June and stuck to them in July and August and is still sticking to them? One of their rationales for introducing premium sharing is, within just a very few short years, we're going to be on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars worth of new taxes, excise taxes, imposed by the healthcare reform package of the president that you, CWA and IBW, helped elect, and who has been known to refer to your plan as a Cadillac. Right. And we agree, it is a Cadillac that we can no longer afford to provide you with. I mean, what goes around comes around. And for the Verizon employees here, I think they'll recognize this propaganda line. It has not made holding the line, as we did in '89, any easier in 2011. And so I think that's a convoluted answer to a probably simpler question. And I think, we have to remind people that this reform effort sadly fell far short. The people were continuing to go through these bargaining ordeals at healthcare. There will be no end in sight until we get the issue off the table, and either at the state level or on a broader basis, get a Medicare for all system. I think the public employee unions had the greatest responsibility to take the lead in this respect, because their healthcare is already publicly funded. It's already tax supported. And teachers and state workers and county municipal workers, whether in Vermont or New York State or anywhere, are not going to be able to continue to rally public support for the defense of their quote-unquote Cadillacs, which, as in the case of Verizon, very often are not Cadillacs, but may be perceived to be Cadillacs by people in the private sector who are taxpayers, who are paying out of pocket for their medical care, may have lost their job, may be paying COBRA rates, may never have had decent health insurance. And so that kind of divide, as we know, can be used against us. The private sector can be pitted against the public sector. The only way any purported Cadillac drivers or owners can rally support from the rest of the population is to fight for something that's going to cover everybody. And we have the model for that. The folks in Vermont took some brave first steps in the right direction in the first 4 or 5 months of this year. It's going to be a hard road in coming years to keep the momentum going there. But every union has a stake in it, and more people got to wake up and smell the coffee before it's too late, because okay, Brother John?
Yeah, a couple things. In your book, in your latest book, you talk about the governor created basically bargaining units, particularly SEIU, that organize. And the question about that would be, I mean, if a union can be created with a stroke of a pen and then uncreated with a stroke of a pen, how real was it, number one? And number two, you talk a lot about the mega locals that are particularly featured with SEIU across the country, 50,000 members with appointed leaders, and the problems that creates in terms of union democracy. Could you explain a little bit of that? I mean, how real is a local of 50,000 members, maybe not created by the stroke of a governor's pen, but whose leader is appointed from headquarters, and what kind of control can a union member have over a bargaining unit like that?
Well, two good questions. On the first one, I think, even if we didn't face the problems that SEIU and AFSCME, the UAW and Michigan have faced as a result of this switch from Democratic governors and legislators to Republican governors and legislators. In New Jersey, the joint CWA-IBW child care unit was only recently created, as I described in the book, in 2005, 2006, was a product of a relationship both unions had with John Corzine shortly after. He did us and the child care workers the favor of creating a unit that was then legislated into existence. Chris Christie took over, and he is not someone that thinks that these child care providers should be in a union. And we've seen what he's tried to do to the people who've been in public employee unions for many years there. So even if the climate was better, the post-recognition job of building a real union in big statewide units of home-based workers would be pretty challenging. And I'm not sure all the unions involved, the 5 that I mentioned, were equally committed to doing that follow-up work. I mean, certainly some of them saw this political organizing approach as a way to quickly create a kind of cash cow, milking for dues a very low-income workforce, often largely part-time and not even able to work enough hours to qualify for minimal health care coverage negotiated in the initial agreements. Some unions, had spent many years, SEIU Local 880 out in Illinois, which was originally affiliated with ACORN, but they had spent many years actually building a community organization type network of both child care providers and home health care aides. So they had an organization in place before they got their respective bargaining unit deals from the tainted governor, soon to be headed for jail, Rod Blagojevich. He did a couple of mitzvahs in his life. He did create these bargaining units in return for SEIU political support. But they had done some real important grassroots organizing, and there was an organization of workers that predated the creation of the collective bargaining relationship with the state. Elsewhere, I don't know, people may know more about the CSEA's relationship with the child care provider unit that was created here in upstate, and what the AFT was done with the group in downstate New York. I think, as these unions, certainly my old union in CWA in New Jersey, as they have come under assault for the rest of the state workforce they represent, and it's been a terrible fight with Christie, these newcomers, these folks who aren't even real state workers, are not getting the attention that they deserve to kind of maintain the level of organizational activity that it took, to get certified. We had a very interesting network of what we call neighborhood shop stewards when the child care providers in New Jersey first organized. There was a lot of lobby days and activity around funding of the program, but it's really got to be much more of a community organization model when people don't see other members of the union unless they know them and run into them in the neighborhood, because their work is in their own home, taking care of their own family members, or they're going into other people's homes, and it's not a traditional unionized workplace. In SEIU, I think that since that's the union that has added most members of this type in the last 10, 15 years, the problem of representation, accountability, do people have a voice? Do they have a real union? Has been aggravated by this top-down consolidation, the creation of huge statewide, what you call mega locals, with anywhere from 40 to 50 to 60 to as many as 300,000 workers in them. Again, the home-based workers are given an 800 number. Call us if you have a problem.
For grievances?
Yeah, and as that model has spread to people, I think there's a little bit of a rationale for it. If you're not in a traditional workforce, if you're not in a big state office building, if you're not in daily interaction with other workers and can contact a steward or a union rep, having an 800 number, calling a call center run by the union may be the next best thing. As they've extended that model to other types of workers, there's been a pretty big membership backlash against it, because people know that if they have a serious problem, if there's a major contract violation, if there's a safety hazard, if somebody gets fired, you don't want to be talking to somebody at a call center about that. You want to be able to go to a steward, to a local officer, to someone you know and trust that knows the contract in your own workplace. And I think sadly in more and more places in SEIU that's hard to find. Female hand. All right, well, we're going to then go with the Gabby guys. Yes, the brother here, and then over
We
here.
should do it in a representative. We should count how many women are here, and then that's the percentage of women. Right?
I don't know. Sometimes this labor notes method of chairing works. Sometimes it doesn't. Always worth a try.
You were saying earlier that people need to wake up. I really believe most of the people are waking up. But it's our union leaders that are not waking up, right?
Yeah.
They're not. I have a hard time with Trumka. I had a hard time with Hoffa and Larry Coleman. To get them to say...
Now we're getting closer to home.
I know that. I have a hard time
Yeah.
getting them to endorse the Wall Street in New York, all right?
Yeah.
Finally, Trump has endorsed it, okay? He even said his own words. You guys in CWA, you are in a picture because if you guys go down, and that's where all the CEOs are looking, if they could beat you guys on the contract, there's going to be somebody else. It might be Hoffa, it might be Trumka, but these three leaders need to get together because if CWA is in trouble, you got Hoffa back here. You got Trumka back here. But I don't see that at all. So, like I said, people are waking up, the leaders are not waking up.
I think, well, as many people know, since we all have our own individual examples of this problem, I'm sure, how you hold people accountable as full-time officials, whether at the local level or certainly becomes even harder as they ascend the ladder of career, of upward mobility in the labor movement and get further and further away from their rank and file roots if they had them. You know, we have a number of problems, I think, peculiar to the labor movement that unions have less of in other countries. One is the fact that the leadership still is a kind of gerontocracy. These people don't want to retire. You know, we really do need, some people argue that it's illegal under our age discrimination statutes. I don't think it is. We need more formal or informal mandatory retirement ages in unions. It's part of the problem, and I'm not saying, you know, just having younger people will make everything better, but it would be a good start. You know, when people like, and I'll mention some names, Jerry McEntee or Morty Barr, who was Larry Cohn's predecessor, hang on as presidents of their unions into their late 70s. Some have even made it into their 80s. You know, Mo Biller, the head of the postal workers, I think was 83 before he stepped down. You know, it further, I think, adds to the distance between the working members and the people who are collecting big six-figure salaries, multiple pension plans, are not affected by the takeaway trends that are lowering the standard of living of millions of workers and hundreds of thousands of union members, yet somehow continue to cling to these leadership positions. And it perpetuates itself. You know, John Sweeney initially said he was going to leave at 65. Wrong. You know, he hung on for another 10 years. Rich Trumka, you know, was kind of like Prince Charles, still is, waiting in the wings the whole time that Sweeney was the top dog. So Rich finally gets to take over. He's about my age, you know, 60 or 61 when he became president of State Fed. He's not a big fan of mandatory retirement at 65. Why? Because he sees himself, his heart condition permitting, staying on as long as Sweeney did, which means we're going to have him for another 15 years, and he's still going to be there at 75. So I think that's maybe a necessary, if not sufficient, reform structurally within some of our unions, getting more of these people out. Now, Brother Larry, whatever other legitimate beefs people may have with him, and he's had to preside over CWA in a very difficult time, and it was not left to him in the greatest shape, in my view, by Brother Barr. He is a believer in this. He has announced that he is leaving at the end of this term at 65. He's trying to set an example to others to do that inside and outside of CWA. And Andy Stern, of whom I am not a fan, for sure, did set a good example by leaving, for whatever reason he left, at the tender age of, 62. So, 3/4 of the union membership in this country is over the age of 35. There's a reason why the unions are desperately chasing after the occupation movement, because these people in and around these tents are young. But they have millions of young members, and they are not more involved or as involved in their unions as they should be, because they see a lot of pale, stale male faces hanging on for much longer than they should. It's not institutionally healthy, and it doesn't create the space for new blood, new ideas, new people, and particularly women, people of color, the foreign-born. It makes it harder for everybody to play a bigger role in unions when you have this layer of people who won't leave. So
It's a shame when I was down in New York City, some of my group, all right?
Yeah.
I'm friends with different locals. They went down on their own. And
Yep.
for doing it on your own without having support from your leader, we ain't getting anywhere, because we're not united. We're divided. And the only people that are fighting is people right here.
yeah.
That's why I'm saying the leaders need to get together and
Well, let's hear from some other people. But again, I mean, ideally, I think that's the best approach. The leadership track record hasn't been too great over the last 6 years. We had the change to win split, which really hasn't amounted to a row of beans in terms of actually building labor strength. Going back to that IBW CWA example, after we had that terrible Me Too contract experience in NYNEX in 1986, CWA people, were just scapegoating and blaming and denouncing the IBW. Morty Barr and Jack Barry would never have gotten together at the top and built the kind of bargaining and strike coalition that we did in NYNEX in 1989, because that had to be done from the bottom up. It had to be done at the rank and file level, the steward level, the local officer level, member to member, across those ridiculous union boundaries. And that's the way, in that situation, a unity coalition that persists to this day was built. But if we had waited, Morty, Jan Pierce, Jack Barry, can you guys come together and create unity? They were like the unions tailing after the occupation movement. They got on board after we made it happen, fortunately for the future at the local level. Anyway, let's hear from some other folks.
Sorry. A while back, I think John probably organised this. Sal Rosselli was here in Troy, and we had a chance to meet with him.
Yeah.
And that was really a great experience, actually. And the title of your book actually sort of brought this back to mind about that sort of very heavy-duty conflict that was taking place maybe about a year ago, I think, in California between SEIU and National Union of Healthcare Workers, right? And I saw in the paper not that long ago that the election results had been annulled, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering, I haven't seen a lot since, and I was wondering if you could have a take on that, how things stand at the moment,
I'll give you the Reader's Digest condensed version of what's in the book and the postscript that's not. First, let me start with Sal, because he is a major character in the book, and someone that I'd known a little bit over the years. He used to come to Labor Notes conferences, but someone who I have come to greatly admire and respect. I mean, he is a native of Albany, and I think some people know who met him. Went to a Catholic college in upstate New York, got bounced out for anti-war activity in the 60s. He ended up working with Dorothy Day in the Catholic Worker House. Ended up as a VISTA volunteer, a farm worker volunteer, ended up in California, came out of the closet, got involved in gay activism in the Bay Area, and got involved in SEIU originally as a kind of rank and file worker. He was taken under the wing by George Hardy, a former national president of the union, and helped build the Bay Area local that became part of United Healthcare Workers West. SEIU's third largest affiliate, 150,000 members. Sal was the president for 20 years. He came into office as a reformer, as someone challenging the international union, battling a candidate that John Sweeney, at that time president of SEIU, was trying to impose from Washington. And you know, his leadership of the kind of emerging reform current within SEIU in 2007, 2008 was really, you know, very unusual, because most people who have been on international union executive boards, this gets back to, you know, your issue, as Sal was, he was the head of the SEIU State Council representing 700,000 SEIU members. It's the state where they had the most members, and a longtime leader of a local. Most people at that point in their life, you know, almost 60, don't become dissidents, right? Just for the fun of it. You know, they don't risk being sued for $25 million. They don't risk their local being put under trusteeship because its elected leaders stood up for the membership and for democracy and against labor management partnership schemes that were making it hard for California healthcare workers to properly serve and speak out for their patients. So, though a lot of people were skeptical of Sal's stance initially, I think the actions that he and an incredibly committed core of rank-and-file activists, longtime organizers, took in first resisting the threatened trusteeship throughout 2008, and then out of the ashes of the old, building this new union, which is a very difficult struggle. We've got bargaining rights for about 10,000 hospital and nursing home workers now. In the election that they participated in last year in the service and technical unit at Kaiser statewide in California, it was the biggest private sector representation vote in 70 years. And they were outgunned. I mean, SEIU threw millions of dollars worth of staff and resources into it, but really only won through collusion with the employer. And the labor board, as bad as it is, when it investigated the election, decided that the objections that NUHW filed after losing the election warranted the election being overturned. And the margin was about 18,000 to 11,000, so it wasn't that close. There is going to be a rerun. In the meantime, it's a little hard to tell where and how NUHW can get the resources necessary to be competitive in the largest single Kaiser unit. Their focus at the moment is trying to get first contracts for the Kaiser groups that they represent that switched from one union to another. And even though small, like the UE for many years in the context of GE bargaining, they've been a catalyst for broader militancy. They've been a good influence on other unions. They've rebuilt their relationship with the California nurses that had kind of drifted off into the SEIU camp at the top. And you know, they're putting up an impressive fight. They still need a lot of help from friends all around the country. But financially, they are pressed because initially they received a couple $1 million from the California nurses. When Stern and the SEIU attacked the hotel workers, John Wilhelm gave them considerable resources. You know, that outside funding is not there. They don't have a national union partner or bankroller, so they are paying for their bargaining and organizing work out of the dues that they're collecting from the groups that have joined NUHW, gotten contracts. Many members are paying dues voluntarily to the union in units where they're still in contract negotiations. So it's a very interesting model of volunteerism, rank and file initiative, stewards doing the work that under the old model UHW would have been done by full-time staff. But you know, they don't have it as an organization of 10,000. So they're holding their own, and
is that there are 10,000?
yeah, bargaining rights for 10,000. But you know, the 4,000 at Kaiser. Kaiser's demanding concessions. People didn't switch from a company union to NUHW to bargain and give back contracts. So that's why they've been trying to build this broader anti-concession coalition, including the CNA and other groups whose contracts are not yet up. Yes, Brother Andy.
Please share your thoughts about Sandy Pope and the Teamsters.
Well, Sister Sandy is, like Sal, one of the most impressive people I've ever met, nearly 40 years in the labor movement. People here ever met Sandy or heard her speak? She's been through town. You know, a veteran of labor activism since the mid-1970s. She, who would have ever thought that a Hampshire College dropout would be running for president of the Teamsters?
Whoever would have thought that Martin McGuinness is running for president of Ireland tomorrow? An IRA rebel commander.
You know, maybe Sandy should have gotten an endorsement from Martin. No, a similar, highly unusual trajectory. You know, Sandy's first job was in AFSCME. She was a mental hospital worker after she dropped out of school in Northampton, Mass. And then she went out to Cleveland, went to truck driving school, learned to drive a tractor trailer, was a working Teamster for 5 or 6 years. You know, I think one of the greatest challenges of her campaign against Junior Hoffa was to challenge him repeatedly to a truck driving contest. Well, Junior has a famous last name. He never, in his life, as a card-carrying Teamster member, got behind a straight truck, a tractor trailer, or even a fork truck, as far as we know. Sandy did that for 5 or 6 years and then became a member organizer like Pat and CWA for a reform-minded Teamster Local 407 in Cleveland, and became a TDU activist. You know, she took a break for a few years, was the national director of Coalition for Labor Union Women. She played a very prominent role in the national staff of the Teamsters during the Carey years, from 1992 to 97. In the late 90s, went back and became the leader of this warehouse and miscellaneous manufacturing local in Queens, 805. And, you know, her campaign, I think, has really resonated. She's gotten a lot of support from UPS workers, what remains of freight. You know, the other side has enormous resources at its disposal. I mean, Hoffa's raised millions for this campaign. And the three-way split that the reformers were hoping would play their way in the way that it did in 1991 when Carey ran and got elected as a TDU-backed candidate, I'm afraid hasn't played out the way that it should have. There's a third candidate in the race, a former Hoffa supporter from Wisconsin who's on the executive board. He's broken away. But I don't think he split away enough of the establishment vote to help Sandy get to the high 40s that she would need to win a three-way race like Ron did in 91 with 48% of the vote. I mean, the TDU candidates, you know, in the last 3 races have consistently gotten 35 to 40% of the vote, which is nothing to sneeze at. That's a significant block of people who believe that the unions should be headed in a different direction. But you know, they're doing frenetic voter turnout. There's another couple of weeks in which people can return their ballot. You know, 1.3 million people get to vote, largest trade union election in the U.S. every 5 years. Most other unions don't even have direct election of their top officers. So I was at the convention in Las Vegas, my first Teamster convention ever in Las Vegas. A memorable occasion, and Sandy and her embattled group of supporters acquitted themselves very well in a very hostile work environment. She's an amazing woman, and I think will continue to be an inspiration not only to 400,000 women Teamsters, but to a lot of other people in the labor movement, win or lose, for years to come. So let's hear from some folks. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you offer the public employees any examples that you've seen where pressure points were successfully applied to a mendacious union-busting governor?
Boy, who's been winning in those kinds of fights lately? Well, I mean, hey, a contract rejection vote is the first step, so let's hear it for the PEF folks. And those in Connecticut who, you know, initially said thumbs down to the deal that their committee worked out with Malloy. You know, I think there's an enormous amount of rebuilding that needs to be done. The biggest challenge is, you know, in those states where, you know, bargaining rights have temporarily or for the foreseeable future been rescinded. And, you know, as inspiring as the Wisconsin upsurge was, the situation there now is kind of grim. You know, when these groups, which for years have depended on a kind of top-down, staff-driven servicing model, lose automatic dues checkoff, and they've just agreed to a round of concessions, even when you've had the inspirational model of, you know, people taking over the state capitol and doing weeks and months of kind of mass action, there's a high level of membership dissatisfaction, and their dues payments, all of which now have to be voluntary, plummeting. And so the teachers, the state workers, AFSCME, SEIU, all the unions that are affected by Walker's legislation, you know, for a month or so now, it's been welcome to the open shop that people in right-to-work states, of course, have, you know, always had to deal with. In this new open shop environment, you know, which may be reversed by the referendum vote on SB 5 in Ohio, hopefully shortly, but may not. You know, the model is what Mitch Daniels has done in Indiana. When he took over in 2005, there were about 33,000 state workers. He got that down to 27. Before he was governor, there were 16,000 dues-paying members. Once he got rid of dues checkoff, membership there has plummeted to 1,500 among state workers. So that's the future of people that are losing checkoff or bargaining rights or some combination thereof in these other states. And it's the soft underbelly of public sector unionism, to get back to your question. I mean, when unions don't develop stewards, when they don't encourage activism in the workplace, when they don't involve members in contract campaigns, and they take the more typical approach of, you know, we're going to rely on our professional lobbyists in Albany. We're going to use lawyers to solve our problems. We're going to have the full-time staff handle the bargaining. In flush times, maybe that works. In the current environment, in more and more states, even with Democratic governors who aren't as bad as the Republican bad guys, that's not going to be enough. And certainly in situations where, you know, there's internal tensions between leadership, which, you know, agrees to concessionary agreements, and then there's a membership revolt of one sort or another against it. If there's not leadership from the ranks to take the bargaining in a different direction or develop, which is difficult to do when you don't control the apparatus of the union, a different strategy for generating support or for fighting for tax reform or for single-payer health care. I mean, I think the problem theoretically is that so many of the public sector union leaderships have accepted the box that, you know, that people are in, right? And they're told there's nothing you can do. Tax revenues are down because of the recession. We all know that the tax structure is inequitable, and, you know, we can't do anything about that. Can't tax a few more millionaires.
Mean to me.
What?
Times are bad, and the
Yeah.
mean to me.
Everybody else is giving back. Medical cost inflation. Everybody else is paying more for their benefits, and you know, of course, we can't have single payer, and of course, we can't do anything about, you know, the $700 billion a year that we spend on 2 wars and the Pentagon budget. You know, the $1 trillion that was spent over the last 10 years on Iraq and Afghanistan, just that tidy sum alone would do a lot to close a lot of real and imagined state, county, and municipal budget deficits. But, you know, public employee unions, with a few honorable exceptions, don't dwell on that little bit of economic reality. So unless people break out of the box and say, hey, you know, yes, there is a you know, public sector fiscal crisis here, but why don't you work with us, Governor Cuomo or Governor Brown, on a single-payer health care program in New York or California that would save public government a considerable amount of money, and also better address the problem of the uninsured in the private sector. You know, I think public sector unions are going to be much more prominently involved in U.S. labor against the war. They need to do what the UE did for years in private sector bargaining with any employer that looked for medical givebacks before they'd even discuss it. Here, we want you to sign up, you know, and join the single-payer campaign. Because, you know, if you're not willing to join us in seeking a political solution, we're not willing to talk to you about, you know, healthcare concessions at the bargaining table. Now, you know, we weren't always able to make that position stick, but the idea was to kind of reframe the discussion and challenge the other side, you know, to seek real solutions. And I think a little bit of that has started to happen around the issue of national budget priorities. I mean, not that he's a great mayor or has been that labor-friendly, but you know, the governor of Los Angeles and a coalition of other municipal officials have joined together with some union pressure and, you know, sent an appeal to Washington to cut the military budget and, you know, redirect more of our federal tax dollars to these pressing domestic needs and to help continue to provide some minimal level of state, county, and municipal services. So I think just trying to deal with it at the bargaining table, just trying to rely on relationships with traditional friends who haven't always been that friendly, I mean, these things are not panning out. But the internal organizational challenge, whether you've lost bargaining rights, whether your bargaining rights have been curbed, whether you still have checkoff or not, people don't start to rebuild their base, kind of, you know, utilizing some of the techniques that NUHW has had to fall back on to survive. You know, the other side's going to exploit that organizational weakness. They already are. Some folks that we haven't heard from. Brother Gordon.
Can you tell us why CWA went back to the table after all of that hullabaloo, all that steam that got built up?
Well, certainly not an official spokesperson anymore. I haven't been on the CWA payroll for 4 years now. You know, because of my own past experience with a number of these strikes that we've been talking about, you know, I was very concerned that there wasn't sufficient preparation for a full-scale open-ended strike. You know, the bargaining coalition between IBW and CWA, as strong and as durable and as impressive as it's been, has always had one major internal tension. The IBW telephone workers are second-class citizens in a building trades union. Their leadership does not believe in striking. They have no national strike fund. And the 10 to 12 union partners that we have in this region, the IBW telephone worker locals, have no local strike funds. Okay, so anytime you go out on strike, whether it was 1989, when CWA didn't even have an adequate strike fund, or 2000, or 1998, or August, you've got one group that within 2 weeks is eligible for $200 a week, that goes up to $300, has the institutional capacity to pay people's COBRA when the company cuts off health care. The CWA member relief fund has over $400 million. So right away you have this built-in kind of, you know, financial imbalance in terms of institutional support. The phone company this time was much quicker than in '89 to announce that it was cutting off medical benefits. As of the end of August, if that strike had continued, all 45,000 people involved and their families would have been paying for their own medical benefits.
How many are IBW?
About 10 to 15. Mm-hmm. The CWA folks would have been covered, would have been protected. And that was one of the lessons that was learned the hard way from '89, when we bankrupted a $30 million strike fund in 3 months, had to borrow $15 million from the Japanese telephone workers to make it through the 4th month. After that, the CWA convention delegates added on an assessment to the dues and built up a fixed weekly strike benefit fund that pays out according to a very different method than we had before, not based on need. And, you know, these are large amounts of money. In the 2000 strike, it only went for a couple of weeks, the CWA strike fund spent over $21 million. On a strike that involved 75,000 strikers in all. At that time, maybe 60,000 of them were CWA. So the IBW was not financially prepared for an open-ended strike. The strike was never framed as we're going to strike and stay out until we get a contract. I mean, there was some confusion about this among supporters, understandably, but I think most members, activists, and leaders, you know, understood that the strike was to get the company back to the table bargaining in better faith, which they certainly hadn't been in the 6 weeks prior to contract expiration. You know, the intermittent strike strategy is not without precedent. HRE at Yale has used it most effectively in their first contract for the clerical administrative group there years ago. They had a strike that started really for a first contract in the fall semester. You know, it's a university. You come to Christmas break, everything shuts down. I mean, what's the point of staying on strike? So in that situation, they had a home for the holidays, return to work movement, and they went out again when the Yale campus attempted to reopen in the second semester. So it's not unheard of to try to structure your strike activity in a way that minimizes the cost and risk to members and to their unions. The strike was very high impact. I don't know how many casualties there were in 11/18, but there were 80 to 90 IBW and CWA members who were fired or suspended for alleged strike misconduct in just 2 weeks. That toll was mounting rapidly. I mean, it was a high impact strike. The community intervention, the disruption at the wireless stores, the thing did definitely catch on, but in a way that was less noticed, people were paying a price for this. And again, all of the CWA strike casualties, who I think are being held as a hostage to the bargaining, because many of them are not back, are being taken care of. They're getting $300 a week, they're getting their medical benefits pay. In the IBW New England locals, they're passing the hat for the fired strikers there, and they are not being taken care of. So clearly, you know, the problem now is the company has not budged much. And the pressure campaign directed at wireless is not having sufficient impact, it would appear. Going back out now, which may still be necessary, I don't know what the state of internal deliberations about that are. It's not the best time of year, you're coming into the holidays. But you know, more and more of these defensive struggles have to be thought of as protracted struggles, and we have to be smart about how we wage them. My favorite local in the region still is 1298, Connecticut. They bucked a nationwide CWA pattern settlement that involved concessions in the last round of bargaining with AT&T. They stayed out on their own for 18 months, tying the company up with board charges, avoiding a declaration of impasse. They took suspensions, they took firings. They ultimately had to eat a few of the givebacks, but they didn't pay anything for their premiums for half of the current contract. Because they fought smart and they didn't go out, they avoided being locked out. I think they could have added the additional element of doing grievance strikes. One of the things I've advocated is let the contract expire. You know, the old terms remain in effect, except you can't count on automatic dues deduction, but you do regain the right to strike during the life of the agreement. You're no longer bound by the arbitration clause. And one of the things that we have not utilized, and we need a lesson in how to do it from Brother Dom, the Momentum workers, is in a protracted bargaining, work without a contract situation, utilize the fact that you now have an open-ended grievance procedure and you can bring cases as they arise to the third step. And in a multi-state unit of 45,000 people, you could pull out a call center, pull out a garage, pull out a whole state, pull out a department at any time, as long as it's framed as a non-contractual, just grievance-related strike. And, you know, they don't use it much anymore, but the folks, you know, under the...
Taking a vote in, what, November 2nd and 3rd, 1st and 2nd? We got 50, 60 cleared, step 3, we're gonna arm up the Gatling gun.
Yeah, so GE locals that still use this, though less than they used to, and the former GE locals that still have that language in their contract, you know, have the ability to do it during the life of the contract. Any union that lets the old contract terms expire, except, you know, they have to remain in effect while the bargaining continues until there's a declaration of impasse, you know, has this new tactical flexibility. But it's been so long, really, since people struck over grievances, they've forgotten how to do it and don't think they have the right to do it, even in situations when they do. But I think it would be, the bottom line is very difficult in today's climate with Verizon's current capacity to create its current striker replacement capacity to wage an open-ended strike with 45,000 people like we did in '89 at 9X. You know, 9X at that time was just New York and New England. Verizon is nationwide. The unionized percentage of the workforce is down to 30%. And about 15,000 of that 30% is covered by contracts in other parts of the country that don't have common expiration dates. So one of the things they did to prepare for this strike and weather it for 2 weeks was move managers in from former GTE, now Verizon units in Florida, the Midwest, Idaho, California. And then you have this huge non-union workforce in wireless that's 80,000 strong. That's a major Achilles heel. So they have non-union contract call center outsourcing capacity. They have the ability to bring in independent contractors to do outside plant work. Some of the customer service rep work on the landline side can be shifted to wireless call centers that are unrepresented. And they have the ability to move managers in from other parts of the country. So all of those, need to be factored into the question of how effective would be an open-ended strike would be, or even a resumed strike. Another strike of shorter duration would remind the company that people haven't given up here. On the other hand, people might be locked out. Now, that would be preferable, obviously, in terms of unemployment benefit eligibility and boron-type public sympathy and so forth. But it's a tough call for people at the top. And I don't know, Pat or others, am I in the range of reality here? Or, I don't, I think people need to be prepared to go in a couple of different directions. My own pet idea for a long time, studying the 1298 AT&T contract struggle that went on for 18 months after everybody else settled, is trying the grievance strike route, because that's introduces an element of disruption that's more flexible on the union side, less risky, and legally protected. As long as you don't try to turn it into a series of intermittent strikes over the contract, in which case the board will weigh in on the company's side and you're likely to be locked out. But what do you guys think?
What they also did was had non-union workers from North Carolina that actually did the work. It wasn't even managers that had to be like quick trained, that can't get up a pole or whatever.
You mean that were already on the Verizon payroll elsewhere, or that were brought in as?
No, North Carolina, right to work for less state.
Yeah.
They were just, they said you.
Yeah, again, if you were to Monday morning quarterback our performance in CWA, and some of us raised this issue in 2000, Verizon merged. Well, first there was a merger between 9X and Bell Atlantic, which made the company bigger, and then they merged with a company called GTE. Now, GTE had these other smaller IBW and CWA bargaining units in other parts of the country, smaller, weaker, and if we were the hotel workers, and they have waged a heroic struggle to do this, we would have found a way to try to align those contracts and try to get the standards inherited from the former GTE properties up to the levels of the Northeast, and have more Verizon unionized workers in a position to strike if necessary, or at least to be bargaining at the same time. And the hotel workers, I think, probably done more than anybody to try to take on Hilton and the Hyatt and some of these other big nationwide chains that way.
All the expiration dates.
Yeah, and that is not easy, right? If you have to go to your members in San Francisco and say, oh, guess what, guys? We're going to have to work without a contract or weather a strike or lockout for 6 months or 12 months or 2 years so that our contract lines up with Chicago, New York, and Honolulu.
Yeah.
Now, unless you've done a lot of membership education and people understand in a pretty sophisticated way why that boosts your bargaining clout, most people are going to say, hey, I want my contract settled sooner rather than later. And it's the same sort of conversation and discussion that we had to have for years about the need for card check and neutrality and bargaining rights, and why that should be a strike issue and a bargaining issue to protect the standards of people on the landline side. Yes?
I have 2 lines of question or request for information or your opinion on. One I'll defer to later after other people have a chance to ask questions and if there's interest in it. That involves the potential for strengthening or utilizing labor-religion coalition cooperation. But the thing I'd like to ask first is about solidarity. I was one of the people involved in championing a no vote in the PEP contract and a no vote in the second ratification vote. And reading and talking to some of the members of my work site, and then reading some of the blog comments, or whatever, however, I'm not putting a lot of value on that, but that it does get some surfacing and some discussion throughout the state, and that is the solidarity. Some people are arguing different definitions of solidarity. You know, it's solidarity in the eyes of the beholder. And you know, if you really believed in solidarity, you wouldn't vote no, because you are laying those people off. But those of us that advocate no vote say the governor has the power to fire us. The governor's doing that. And other people say solidarity is sticking up for the union and for protecting those rights, and you know, the people came before us. Just wondering if you have any comments on in your experience traveling around the country in different strikes and different public-private sector. You come across this different feelings about solidarity?
Yeah, I mean, it's become a real minefield, particularly when the concession demands take the form of two-tier in whatever form the particular employer is trying to get it. And the bait is, hey, nobody who's in the existing bargaining unit is going to be affected by the pension plan change or the health care plan change or the elimination of job security protection. And, you know, as we've seen, that has become a very corrosive, eroding effect on auto industry bargaining units. It created a lot of havoc for years when that was a concession bargaining tactic in the airlines, and you ended up with mechanics and flight attendants, even pilots, you know, doing the same work often for many years, you know, next to people who were being paid a fraction of what they got as senior employees. So, I mean, even where it's not a question of, you know, do you vote yes or no based on, you know, what will have the best chance in the long run of saving jobs, there's also this difficult problem of where do you draw the line on, you know, fighting for younger workers and the next generation, people who haven't even been hired yet that you don't currently represent. You know, I'm going tomorrow night to a campus union forum at the University of Vermont. The Faculty Federation there has bravely just rejected a tentative agreement that their leadership accepted without sufficient consultation with the rank and file members, and it involved a shift to a plan for medical savings accounts for newly hired faculty members. And the existing faculty members who would not be affected by this, for now, of course. I mean, you know, one way of organizing against this is to point out that, you know, what you accept one time for one group may end up being what the boss wants everybody to be covered by the next time. But they blocked this thing from even being put out to a vote. They've gotten solidarity from the UE represented building and maintenance folks on the same campus who were faced with the same concession demand and are also saying, no, we're not going to agree to this change for new hires and end up with a two-tier contract. And the faculty members got out and picketed the trustees last Friday at a meeting where the president of the university had hoped to announce that he'd wrapped up his negotiations with the faculty. So again, you got some internal tension there. You definitely got a sharpening of labor management conflict between a group, you know, that's jointly represented by the AAUP and the AFT. And, you know, I think there's certainly divisions within the group because there are people ready to vote for that contract, people who are on the bargaining committee who signed off on the tentative agreement because they felt we're doing the best job we could for the people we currently represent, and we're willing to let anybody newly hired, you know, be shifted to this other plan. But, you know, we all know it's a foot in the door. Next it'll be get rid of the group pension coverage and you know, put everybody under 401k in an academic environment, fewer and fewer people, and this has already happened, will have any shot at a tenure track job, and everybody will end up being an adjunct working at 3 different universities and colleges instead of having a decent full-time job with benefits at one. So I think the PEF example, what the UVM Faculty Federation is grappling with, the resistance to two-tier at Verizon, at Kaiser, by some of the Kaiser unions, all of these things are really critical But they do involve taking political risks and, fighting for more than just us, as SEIU would say. Great. Well, this has been an incredible in-depth discussion. Religion and labor, I don't want to lengthen it. There is a part of a chapter in here about a model campaign at a Catholic hospital out in Sonoma County in California, Santa Rosa Memorial. And I think for people who are interested in the power of labor-religion coalitions, the work that was done by the local clergy in Sonoma County over 5 or 6 years is described in the book. And they weren't battling, a big for-profit hospital chain. This was a hospital run by the Sisters of St. Joseph of Orange, based in Orange County. Nuns who had an exemplary record of solidarity with the people of El Salvador, with farm workers, but who, as the owners and operators of Catholic hospitals, have not been so good on the issue of workers' rights. The book talks a little bit about the very good Catholic bishop statement from a couple of years ago about the just rights of workers, the responsibilities of Catholic institutions of higher education and healthcare institutions. And, first the pre-trusteeship UHW and more recently NUHW, I think, put together a very effective coalition to neutralize misbehavior by the nuns and their hired management hands. The order, I think, has been forced to reconsider its lapse and its lack of regard for numerous papal edicts on this important topic over the last century and a half. But I think certainly within the world of Catholicism, there's room for improvement in terms of the labor relations behavior of some institutions run by Catholic dioceses and particular orders. And the only way we're going to get them to change sometimes is to embarrass them publicly, expose their hypocrisy, and enlist ministers, rabbis, and more worker-friendly priests and nuns to keep their feet to the fire. So there's a good study of that brief account here. There's also a terrific book coming out by a guy named Adam Reich, Cornell University Press this winter. It's called With God on Our Side, Struggle for Workers' Rights in Catholic Hospitals. And he was an SEIU organizer who worked on this campaign. And so it's a book-length account of a model labor-religion community-based coalition for a free and fair election that workers ultimately won. They're at the bargaining table now in Santa Rosa as we speak. Hopefully it won't take another year to get a decent first contract. So.